Honestly, I think we can get the conversation started here. We'll talk about today's topic. It's going to be more technical, obviously, around low code, specifically Liferay Objects. Sam's going to lead it. He's got a few slides, but really, as everything, it's an open conversation. Just to reiterate on kind of the attendees and Sam again. Sam's our director of professional services around Liferay and many other areas at Veriday. Again, is platinum partner of Liferay and has been working on the platform we've been for 15 plus years. I was at Liferay for 8 years on the sales side prior to Veriday. Sam has 15 plus years on Liferay, anywhere from verticals on manufacturing, retail, healthcare. So very, very familiar. So happy to have this conversation. I'll let Sam kind of jump right into it today and just ask questions as we go along. Sam?
I think we've got a very small group today, and I think I know everyone here. I know you, Jack. I know you, Ambika. But I think why don't I go through the slides? And I'm happy if this turns into a conversation, right? So one thing I'll start with, Jack, on your side, have you been using Liferay Objects or looking at it at all?
I have not.
All right. So let me walk you through my journey with it then, and we can go from there. I think you know who I am, but my fun fact this month, my daughter's taken up competitive dance. So I watched more live dance this year than I have watched in the entire rest of my life put together. So I'm learning all about the world of competitive dance. So I want to talk. I was thinking about what to talk about, and I thought, the best things to talk about are the things I'm learning about myself, right? And share what I'm discovering, my journey on it, and then get others' opinions and thoughts to help shape things. So when I was at Liferay's partner conference last fall, I think it was, one of the people there mentioned and asked us, who was using Liferay Objects, and not many people put up their hands. I did not put up my hand, but they were very gung-ho about this feature. They were very excited about it and thought it had a lot to add to the platform, a lot of capabilities. And so that kind of piqued my interest. I was in the middle of a couple upgrade projects at the time, so I didn't really do anything with it immediately. But I thought I'd come back to it, in the new year when I had a little bit more time and start looking into Liferay Objects, which is a new feature in 7.4. And I think it was built around some of the limitations in their cloud platform where people can't deploy custom code. And it gave a low code approach to building on Liferay. And so before I get into Liferay Objects, let's talk about why low code. Right. So I was talking to our COO about this, and he was talking about low code, and he said, here's some points you can talk about. Reduced development time, cost saving, improved collaboration, flexibility, higher quality. I think he touched on, at least 4 of those 5. And I, at the same time, this being 2023 and everyone's, exploring generative AI, I said, let's plug this question in here. And those are the 5 points it spat out. And those are the 5 points, variations on those 5 points I've seen on every single low code presentation, document, article I've read, hyping the benefits of low code since I was fresh out of school and working on various applications. And at various times I've worked on different platforms that have promised low code. I spent 2 years working on an identity and access management platform where it was all rule-based and you're dragging and dropping elements on the screen to configure it. And it worked really well until it didn't, and you had to go behind the scenes, and it was a mess of XSL style sheets, and it was incredibly painful to work with. So you had some great trade-offs up front, but of course behind the scenes it didn't work out very well. So those are the promises of low code. Why am I interested in low code? I mean, after all, Veriday, we write software on Liferay. Essentially, we're paid to write software, right? Well, not exactly. We're paid to deliver value, right? So when we engage with our customers, when any of us whether it's Veriday or anyone in the software development world is working with the customer, no one's really paying you to write code. They're paying you to do something for their business that's probably either saving them money or making them money at the end of the day, right? Or making their life easier, quality of life improvements sometimes, but doing something that gives the company value. And how do we do something that gives company value? Well, we look for ways to do it faster. We look for ways to do it better. And I've got that modern agile wheel over on the side of the slides. And if you haven't been to their website, I like the way they present a lot of agile concepts in this modern agile approach they call themselves. But some of their key things are, experimenting and learning rapidly, delivering value continuously. So those two right there are some of the main points why I'm interested in low code. If I can do things faster, if I can experiment faster, if I can get to the end state faster, get the requirements out of the customer, understand their needs, and deliver that value faster, and deliver that value continuously, experiment, then we're going to get better results. I'm also interested, in seeing, what's the strength of the platform. And actually on that point, when I think about Liferay, a lot of what Liferay does well is all the grunt work, right? So I don't have to necessarily write code to manage users. I don't have to write code to manage pages, to manage permissions, to manage roles, to manage documents, to do the web content management that lives alongside it. And as the platform grows, it adds more and more features. And in a roundabout way, if you think about, what's a low code platform, it's something that lets people build software without doing development. Even dragging and dropping portlets on a page, configuring in previous versions of Liferay when we had to make layouts for our pages, we create template files. That was a code-based approach. Now in Liferay DXP, we've got our content display pages. We're dragging and dropping grids on the page. We're rearranging them. Perhaps it's not, business logic, but it's still code that isn't being written anymore. It's done through configuration in the UI. And so that's always been a strength of the platform. Let's see how it's handling application development, which is a much trickier problem to solve. Of course, I mentioned quickly experimenting and prototyping. Another reason I'm interested, I'm lazy. I'd like to think of it in a good way, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily want to do work that doesn't need to be done, right? If there's a better way to do this, if I can automate things, if I can speed things up, and I can spend time focused on delivering business value, writing rules that help the business. I'd rather spend my time there than writing boilerplate code or having my team write boilerplate code. I'm also, though, interested in Liferay Objects because I want to find out if it's good enough for real applications. I've seen a lot of attempts at this with mixed success. And so I heard good things about this. I want to find out if it's good enough for the real world. At the end of the day, though, all of those things about delivering value continuously, it's just another way of saying, cost savings, reduced development time, increased flexibility, higher quality, those same promises of low code. So let's see if it delivered. So that's why I'm interested in low code. And aside, we all know about how we developed on Liferay. We write, if I think of our typical development pipeline, we're doing a lot of prototyping outside Liferay. So a lot of the time we've got our designers, our UI, UX people working in Figma, doing a lot of prototyping there. And then we take it into Liferay. Maybe we can do some rapid development in Liferay. But at the end of the day, we're writing code. And there's a certain speed, a certain time, a certain cost associated with that. So if we can shorten those cycles, we can get feedback faster, we can get better results, all of those things. I'm not going to spend time on this because I think everyone here today knows all about how to develop on Liferay. So what are Liferay objects? So first thing I decided to do is I want to learn about Liferay objects is let's go to Liferay's documentation. Liferay's documentation has been a bit hit or miss at times. I'm being honest, but it's certainly improving and it's not a bad starting point. So I went there and I saw, yes, it's their low code platform, right? They're saying we can build and deliver applications without having to write code. Okay, that's good. What I expected, integrate with Liferay's core frameworks. Okay, let's see what that means, and quickly develop and manage flexible solutions. Okay, that's what I would hope. And then I saw they had a bunch of other pages in their documentation describing all the details of it. But I thought, let's fire up Docker, let's start Liferay, and let's go on an adventure. And let's actually click around and find out what we can do inside objects. But I'm not going on that type of adventure with you today. I'm going to share screenshots and walk through it that way. So first thing I saw when I went to the Liferay Objects screen was a grid. A Liferay grid. I mean, this could be any Liferay administrative screen. So I clicked on the plus, and let's see what we can create. So the first thing, I said, let's create an order for an ice cream truck. So I could see we had a screen here. We could create some details, fill out a form, some object data. So the name, a label, a plural label. And I thought the fourth field down here, table name, was interesting. So one of the things that I had some concerns with when I started looking at the objects before I had dived into it was that this would be using a lot of virtual data structures, virtual tables. And in the past, I've seen, that can sometimes you can run into some performance challenges with that. So it was interesting to see that this was actually creating a real table for me. That gave me a little bit of confidence about the data, about the performance, that it might meet our needs. Obviously more to learn, but we'll see. Kept scrolling down. Okay, we can add an ID. We can specify a scope here, company or site. That's kind of interesting. And we can show a widget. Oh, that's interesting. So we actually might be able to get an application for these. We'll have to see what that looks like and come back to that once we've gone a little bit further. So I kept going. I clicked on the next tabs, started to define some fields. So defining fields, I looked at this and my first thought is service builder, right? These look like a lot of the standard fields I would create when I'm creating a service through Service Builder. And behind the scenes, I'm kind of curious. I wonder if some of that or some variation on that is being used behind the scenes. These are all system fields. I couldn't touch them. For my ice cream truck order, I decided I needed to choose a flavor. So I wanted to add, what flavor ice cream are we ordering? And so I thought, okay, let's add a string. People can type in their flavor. We'll click save. And I went to see the types and I said, oh, that's interesting. There's a pick list. So we can actually define a list of flavors and have it feed into there. Now, I mean, that's in some sense, this is kind of table stakes for this sort of approach, this sort of platform. But it's nice to see Liferay met those table stakes, right? It's giving me what I need to kind of define some relationships, to back my objects up, to have some validation there. As I kept going, so I added my field here, my flavor, my pick list. I saw, okay, there's some basic validation here. I can say this is mandatory, mark as state. And I don't think I explored that much, but I looked at it a little bit later and saw, okay, we can actually enforce rules here. So if I want to track the state of my order, I couldn't go from, ordered to delivered. I could say, ordered in progress, delivered, and I could have transitions and rules around that. So that was interesting. I also noticed that, the next tab, relationships. So I can actually have relationships between my tables. So it actually is giving me a lot in some sense of what Service Builder is giving for kind of some of the more common use cases. So I can create tables, I can create relationships between tables. I can create relationships between my ice cream orders and my users inside my system. This is, not bad. There's something to this. Okay, let's look at the other tabs, layouts and views. Okay, I can make some guesses about what that is. I can probably define some custom views for how my application will look as I'm managing my data. That's kind of interesting. But let's just see what it gives us out of the box. But this actions one was interesting to me. And so kind of diving in here, and this was my journey, I was exploring objects and I saw, okay, we can actually define various actions on our entities as we're going through Liferay Objects. So much like we may have, model listeners for our custom services, we can have actions and triggers for the entities we're creating through Liferay Objects. So there were different options, after adding, after updating, and there are a lot of different options in here. So I chose webhook. I noticed that I could have expressions to control how this behaved. I could run Groovy scripts, so I could use that to integrate with other things. But I said, let's let's call a URL apiicecream.com/make to make my ice cream automatically every time an order is made. That's kind of interesting. And so this being a digital experience platform, what can I do? How can I create my experience? So perhaps I should have consulted with my designer here before going too far, but I made my ice cream to go site. I dragged and dropped some content, some images on the page. And on the right side, I dragged and dropped the widget it gave me for my ice cream orders. So I had a search and I had no results found. Let's see what happens if I click the plus. Okay, I can create my ice cream. I had my drop down. I can put some quantity in there. And so I added a few ice cream orders. And of course, it's got that search box up at the top so I can find all my orders for chocolate. I drilled in a little bit farther into this. I saw, hey, they're also giving me an API. And so by creating this site inside the UI, I also got an API to interact with my ice cream orders. So I could get all my orders, I could add orders, I could update orders, I could do batch operations on them. And as I kind of built more complex entities inside here, I could see, there's a lot of potential here. This was kind of interesting. And I start to think, okay, this has a lot of the core pieces I need to handle a lot of use cases that we actually develop on site Liferay. Not the complex applications, but a lot of the simple kind of CRUD applications. Everything we need is here, and if it does a really good job of everything it has, it could actually handle some of our more complex use cases. And it's pretty quick, it's pretty easy to build. And I thought about that, and what else could we do? So I clicked around a little bit more and I could see, obviously we demonstrated that we could build a very simple application in Liferay very, very quickly. And another way of looking at that, if you've been around Liferay for a while, if you've ever taken any Liferay training, or if you've ever, gone through any of the online tutorials Liferay has, you've probably come across that gradebook application. And what I just did isn't very different than the gradebook application that I think they would build in the older application developer training that would take 3 or 4 days to get through. And my first time exploring that feature, I built this ice cream application, in an hour or two, right? So there is something here that is worth looking into more to see how quickly we can build on top of Liferay. The data was persisted in the database. We had forms here. I didn't mention it, but as I kind of clicked around a bit more, my digital experience, I could actually enhance it, because as I was building my page, there were actually field types that I could actually drag a form onto a page. So just like I add a title and I add, I can add a heading element to my content display pages, or I can add a paragraph or an image, I could actually grab a form. I could drag and drop those form elements, and I could actually back them with my Liferay objects. So I could create a form anywhere on my site and submit that form, and it creates a record in that object, and then I have triggers and actions on that object and all sorts of things. Validation was part of it, so I could add some validation rules. I didn't show those, but they're there. Actions I talked about, the APIs, so I could use this to capture data. Another system could call Liferay through those headless APIs to get data out of Liferay. We could define relationships, dictionaries. Role-based security was there as well too. So I could define, these roles have access to add, update, view, delete, all of those things. And we can import and export those definitions as JSON. So, this is really high level of what Liferay Objects is. But my initial impression is there's something here that is immediately useful. And so I talked to some of the other people on the Veriday team and got their impressions. And I found, a few use cases, some where we were considering using objects, myself included, some where we actually are using objects already. So our theme right now is we're starting small with these. So one is we built a form provider. So we built the form provider for a custom country database. The out-of-the-box UI we get with Liferay Objects lets business users manage all of the data. They can add, update, delete it. I don't think I mentioned it on the last slide, but we get workflow. So if there were approvals in place, you could leverage that as well too. And then the API that's generated for us lets us populate those form fields in Liferay's forms. So we're using that as a provider. It replaces some custom code that was in place before where we're going against the custom database. And the nice thing it got us versus our original custom approach is we got the free UI, right? If we'd had to build a UI for this, be a day or two, it's not a ton of development, but it's development that we didn't have to do for this simple use case. Another place we're using Liferay forms, again, starting small, is for acronyms or dictionary definitions. So a lot of the time, you're browsing a website. This is for a corporate site in I believe it's a B2C setting. And there's a lot of industry specific or even business specific acronyms that are used. And the users would like to see, what does that acronym stand for? So we built a very simple form. It's basically key value as a Liferay object, where you put the acronym in, you put a full definition inside there, and wherever that acronym then gets used in web content, we can have some custom JavaScript on the page and custom tags or classes, attached to that acronym, so that when you render the page, you can click on the acronym, it calls the API, and it shows the definition for it. So you can add the JavaScript to every page so that it's there, and then you're just kind of wrapping your acronym inside some class. The value of that acronym is used as a key into the API to get the data out. Again, if you had to develop this as a pure custom solution, we're not talking a ton of development, but you still have to create the API, you still have to put all the security boilerplate inside of it. Instead, the actual management screens and the definitions are all done, in an hour or two, and then a little bit of time to write the JavaScript. But again, not that much because the API is already there. It's fairly straightforward. They use GraphQL, so if you're familiar with that, it's all standards based. And then the other areas I was looking at it for is where we had some legacy applications. So for example, in an insurance policy, when we're generating an insurance policy, we have a list of subjectivities that can be attached to it, or basically conditions if you think of a contract. And those lists of conditions are standard, but again, business wants to manage them. And they can change over time what's available. They might have start dates, end dates associated with them. So on some, a project that ended in 2023, we actually built screens inside our application to manage all of that data. We wrote a service builder service to manage that data. Looking back on that, if I was to do that today, I'd probably push to use Liferay Objects, because I think we could have accomplished the same thing in a fraction of the time. So these are three use cases where we're using it or exploring using Liferay Objects today. We are in the very early stages of looking into this feature. And I expect we'll be using it more and more, certainly for these smaller use cases, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start using it for larger applications in the future. What are some limitations that we've seen? So the first one, and probably the biggest one, is, how do we handle schema changes? So right now, if I go into my object definitions and I want to delete a column, it's all destructive, right? So that column just gets deleted, that data gets lost. If I delete an entity, that entity and all the data behind it gets lost. So we need an approach to gracefully manage that. And what I'm seeing is in some of the recent updates for Liferay 7.4, actually managing your objects has become part of the headless APIs. So I think the best approach, and I'm not quite there yet, will probably be writing scripts that leverage those headless APIs to maybe add new columns, then move the data, then delete previous columns, or other changes that might be needed. Similarly, propagating changes between environments, so we can export and import these things as JSON. How stable is that? I trust that it's going to work better than LAR files, but my history has given me some pause, some hesitation there. So I want to gain some confidence around that before I go too far and start using this for larger applications where the cost of change is much higher. Complex filtering and access requirements is another one that kind of comes up. So we have basic Liferay permissions. There is what I saw inside objects, this idea of account-based security, so that I can associate users with an account and the objects would be filtered by account. I actually think that would handle a lot of cases that I'm getting at here, where we need to restrict access to data based on some user attributes or user properties that are kind of separate from role-based permissions, but it's something I want to explore more. The second 2 points there are concerns that I've heard raised by Liferay customers, and I share some of them, is that if we're hosting our own Liferay and we want just more control, we don't have it, right? And I think that's one of the big trade-offs between this low-code approach and versus using Service Builder or other APIs and writing our own code, is we're giving up control. And when we give up that control, we have to do it the Liferay way. So if I wanted to, for example, have a Liferay object backed by data in my own database, separate from the L portal schema, whether that's a good idea or not, Liferay Objects probably isn't the best source for that. Now, if I want to submit data, so let's say I want to use Liferay Objects and a Liferay form to capture some data, maybe it's some sort of intake request form. I could certainly create that request, create a Liferay object for it that I'm going to show in my Liferay UI. I could have a webhook or a trigger or an action that pushes that data to some external system. And then that external system, when a workflow is completed outside Liferay, could certainly call a Liferay API and update a status field inside Liferay. So there's different ways you could even use this in an integration concept, but it needs a little bit more to explore. And of course, being a low-code approach inside Liferay, it's tightly coupled to Liferay. And the last one is just confidence, right? This is a feature that's new to me, new to Veriday, new to Liferay itself. And I want to, before I use it on any larger applications, really understand and really have confidence that it can meet all of our needs as things grow and change and scale over time. If I had to summarize this, I'm excited by the possibilities of Liferay Objects, and I'm very curious to see how it develops. And I will personally be evaluating it in a lot of implementations going forward to see, is this the way I want to go forward? Will this let me accelerate my development? Will it let me iterate faster? All of those pieces, without putting me in a box that's going to be hard to get out of if I need to in the future. So that's what I have prepared. If anyone has kind of any thoughts on objects, I'd be happy to talk about them. If anyone's got any experience, I'd be interested to hear your experience. And again, it's a very small group, so I'm not sure we'll get much today.
That was great, Sam. You've saved me a fair amount of time. Thank you.
You're welcome, Jack.
But I have no experience with the Liferay low-code approaches, as I mentioned earlier. So I would need to kick the tires pretty hard myself also to see if I would want to use it anywhere.
Yeah, and like I said, we're starting small. We are still in that kicking the tires approach right now, but I'm sure we'll be talking later on in the year. So if you do get a chance to play with it, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts.
Have you dug into it enough to see how it's leveraging Service Builder and maybe REST Builder?
I have not had a chance to dig into the code. That's actually something I want to do to see how it's implemented. My feeling is it looks very much like REST Builder and Service Builder wrapped in a UI. I think there's probably a bit more going on than that.
When I use REST Builder, and if I'm working on something which needs many custom GraphQL or REST APIs, I generally put everything into one big module for headless.
Yeah.
My client. So I'm curious as to how that's organized here in what this solution might generate for REST and GraphQL APIs. But again, that's back to my earlier question about, how is it using Service Builder and REST Builder?
Exactly. It's on my list of things to do, is to dig into some of that a little bit more. I have noticed from the UI side that every API is in its own context. So if you're kind of noticed when I pulled up the API screenshot here, yeah, so if you look at the URL here, it's /o/c/ice cream truck orders. So that tells you a little bit about what's going on, but there may be more behind the scenes.
Noted. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, your point on a challenge being moving, well, not just modifying schema and source tracking it perhaps, but also moving between environments. You've got database changes, you've got modules that are being generated. It'll be interesting to see, how that all could be bundled together and moved to a different environment. Have you dug into that as of yet?
I've, again, kind of been focused on the UI side. And it was one of the more recent updates that I saw the import export as JSON, or there's been some changes to that. So you're exporting the definition, and then you're uploading the definition into the target environment. It then goes through and recreates all the tables and everything else that's happening behind the scenes. Where I want to play with that more is on the relationship side. So like if you think about Lars, when you had dependencies between different things in Lars, Liferay was not always happy. And I can see that, the same challenge here, right, is if I have, dependencies on pick lists, dependencies on other APIs or other objects, when I export and import them, is it sensitive to the order that I import them in, right? Do I have to manage that, and how do I manage all those pieces? Which is why I'm starting very small for the use cases right now.
That sounds good.
Yeah. All right.
It takes me a lot of time. Moving between environments has always been challenging, even for fragments. Now for this, yeah, and
I haven't seen anything in here to even consider moving data between environments, right? Which again, Dave Nebinger would talk to you about, or is it Olaf? Either David or Olaf has strong feelings about, content versus code and what is what. And this would be data, so it would not be a target maybe for migrating, but in the real world, you have to do it. So the best approaches right now looks to be APIs, right? You'd be doing gets from one side and puts on the other side, or batch operations, but there's some work to be done on larger applications to figure those details out. But
yeah, I can't speak for David or Olaf with respect to where their allegiances are in technical solutions or political. I'll stay out of that one.
Yeah, but no, I've just been exploring this as well, so I'm glad it was useful for you.
Yeah,
and if you start to use it, thanks. I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the future.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we can jump here, and then Jack, thanks for jumping on, and until next time, I guess, huh?
I guess so. Next time. Yeah.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Right. Thanks a lot for that.
Great week.
Yeah, it was a good session, Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you.